Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Galaxy Channel. Tonight we are going to wander, slowly and without any hurry at all, toward one of the oldest and most tender questions a mind can hold. What existed before the first stars? It is a strange and lovely question to carry into the dark, because it asks you to imagine a universe with no light in it, and yet the imagining itself is warm. Like remembering a room you have not yet entered. Think of it as the hush in a great hall before the very first note is played, that suspended moment when the players are seated and the bows are lifted and the whole space is full of waiting, full of a silence so complete that it already feels like music. Before the first stars, the cosmos held exactly that kind of hush, a vast, readied stillness, everything present, and nothing yet sounded, and tonight you get to rest inside it. It is a gentle paradox, really, this idea of a time before the stars. We say before, and the word reaches back, but there was no candle then to read a clock by, no glittering point of light to mark a year, no shining thing at all to cast a shadow or count a season. And so the question folds in on itself in the loveliest way. How can we speak of an age before light, of a darkness that was not empty but expectant, of a universe already humming with everything it would one day become, and yet showing none of it on the outside? That folding, that soft contradiction, is nothing you need to solve tonight. You only need to let it rock you, the way a question with no sharp edges can rock you, back and forth, between the said and the unsaid, between the silence and the song it is about to become. We will move through this slowly, in a handful of unhurried movements, and you do not need to follow any of them closely. We will linger first in that opening hush, the readied dark before anything shone. We will drift back through the very early universe, when everything that exists now was gathered close and warm and woven together. We will visit the long stretch the scientists call the dark ages of the cosmos, an age that sounds heavy and is in truth simply restful, a universe quietly gathering itself. We will watch, near the end, the first faint glow arrive, the first note finally sounding in that great hall, and we will let even that be tender rather than dramatic. And here and there we will pause to feel how small and how safely held you are inside all of it. If you find this useful, if it helps to have a low voice tracing slow shapes in the dark while you let go of the day, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who are also lying awake, others who are listening to the same hush you are listening to, others who would like nothing more than a hand to lead them gently down into sleep. That is all. There will be no more asking after this. From here on, it is only you, and the dark, and the long readied quiet before the first star. So let me invite you now to begin the settling. None of this is anything you need to hold on to. You do not need to remember a single fact. You do not need to understand a single idea. You do not need to keep up or catch up or stay awake for any part of it. The words are not here to be learned. They are here to be a low and steady sound for you to drift on, like the hush of a hall that asks nothing of the audience except that they sit and breathe and wait for the music with an easy heart. Settle in. Let your shoulders ease down, away from your ears, down toward the bed beneath you. Let the small muscles around your eyes loosen. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest low in your mouth. Let the breath you are holding, without meaning to slip out slowly and unhurried into the room. Feel the weight of you, the simple, honest weight, sinking into whatever is holding you up, and let it hold you completely. There is nowhere to be. There is nothing to finish. Let's begin. Let us start at the very edge of the question, with the word before itself, because it is a more tender word than we usually allow it to be. When you ask what existed before the first stars, your mind reaches backward the way it reaches backward through your own life, past the morning, past last week, past the years you can almost touch and the years that have gone soft at the edges. And it expects to keep going, expects that there is always another room behind the room you are standing in. And for most of the story, there is. We can trace the cosmos back and back, each age opening onto an older one, like a hall of doors that keep giving onto further halls. But the very oldest doorway opens onto something that does not behave like a room at all. A beginning so deep that even time grows hushed and uncertain there, and the scientists, who are careful people, lower their voices when they speak of it. You do not need to follow them all the way down. You only need to know that the trail is long and slow, and that walking it backward is like walking back along a quiet beach at dusk, your own footprints fading behind you. The light dimming with every step, until you reach a place where the prints simply stop and the whole shore is one unbroken hush. The earliest moment we can reasonably speak of is almost unimaginably hot and almost unimaginably small. And yet I want you to notice how neither of those words needs to frighten you tonight. Hot here does not mean the harsh heat of a summer afternoon. It means dense with warmth, packed so close with energy that everything was touching everything else. The whole of what would become the universe gathered into a glow more intimate than any embrace. And small does not mean cramped or trapped. It means near. It means that every particle that would one day be a star, a planet, a tree, a thought, a person lying awake in the dark, was at that moment held close beside every other, all of it together, all of it home. Imagine the difference between a great orchestra spread across a wide stage and that same orchestra gathered into a single tuning chord, every instrument sounding the same low warm note at once, indistinguishable, unified, waiting. The early universe was something like that gathered chord, not yet a melody, not yet stars, just a single held warmth, full of everything, sounding nothing in particular, perfectly poised in the hush before the first true note. And in that gathered warmth, there was no light to see by, which is the part that makes this question so beautifully strange. We tend to think of the beginning of the universe as a flash, a brightness, a great burst of brilliance, and there was indeed an unfathomable energy there. But light, the kind of light your eyes are built for, the kind that travels freely across a dark sky to land on you as the shine of a distant sun, could not yet travel at all. The cosmos was so dense, so thick with particles pressed close together, that any glimmer was caught and passed from hand to hand and never allowed to fly. Picture a fog so deep that a lantern held at arm's length vanishes, its glow absorbed before it can reach you, every photon scattered and rescattered, going nowhere. Like a whisper passed around a crowded room so many times that it never reaches the door. The early universe glowed within itself and yet showed nothing outward, a hall full of sound that could not yet leave the hall, a brightness that was, from the outside, indistinguishable from the dark. So already, near the beginning, we have a tender lesson, and it is one you can let settle over you like a blanket drawn slowly up to the chin. Brightness and stillness are not opposites. Fullness and silence are not opposites. A thing can be brimming with everything it will one day be and still appear, from where you sit, perfectly quiet, perfectly dark, perfectly at rest. The musicians are seated. The instruments are warm in their hands. The whole hall is dense with what is coming, and not one note has yet been played. You, lying here in the dark, are not so different from that early cosmos, full of everything you are and everything tomorrow will ask of you, and yet, in this moment, you are allowed to be simply still, simply dark, simply waiting, with all of it held close and none of it sounding. Let that be enough. Let the fullness rest inside the hush. As the gathered warmth of the early cosmos began to ease and spread, something tender happened, and it happened slowly enough that you can rest inside the slowness. The universe expanded. Not exploded, not into anything, not outward through some surrounding space the way smoke fills a room, but expanded the way a held breath expands the chest, the way a chord expands when the fingers loosen and let it ring, every part of it drifting a little further from every other part, the whole thing growing more roomy, more spacious, more at ease. And as it grew roomier, it cooled, the way a crowded room cools when the doors are opened and the press of bodies loosens, and that cooling is one of the most peaceful processes in all of nature. A slow letting go of heat across stretches of time so long they have no edges your mind can hold. There was no fire going out. There was only a warmth spreading thinner and thinner across an ever wider hall, like a single low note allowed to fade across a great space, growing not louder, but more gracious, more diffuse, more serene. In that spreading warmth, the very first simple things began to settle into being, and I want to tell you about them not as physics, but as a kind of homecoming, because that is truly what it was. At first, there were no atoms at all, only the loose pieces from which atoms are made, drifting free in the bright fog, too restless and too warm to join. But as the cosmos cooled, these pieces began to find each other. The tiny positive cores we call protons and the lighter pieces we call electrons, which had been racing apart and dodging one another in all that heat, slowed enough at last to pair off, to settle together, to form the first whole, calm, neutral atoms of hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant substance there is, the gas from which in time every single star would be made. Picture a room that has been loud and crowded all evening, everyone moving, everyone separate, and then imagine the hour growing late and the music growing low, and one by one people finding the person they came with, drawing close, going still. That is what the early universe did. The protons found the electrons. The pieces found their partners. The first atoms formed, quietly, everywhere at once, across the whole expanse of the cosmos, in a great hushed settling that the scientists call recombination, though it was really the first combination. The first time the universe ever managed to hold something whole. And here is the part that I find almost unbearably lovely, the part I would like you to carry softly down into sleep. The moment the universe formed those first calm atoms, the fog lifted. Remember how light could not travel before, how every glimmer was caught and scattered and never allowed to fly. That was because the loose electrons, racing free, were forever in the way, forever catching the light and tossing it aside. But once the electrons settled down into atoms, once they found their partners and went still, they stopped getting in the way, and all at once, across the entire cosmos, the light was set free. After ages of being trapped, of glowing within, and showing nothing without, the light of the early universe suddenly streamed outward in every direction, unhindered, released, like a held breath finally let go, like the first sound a hall makes when the doors are at last thrown open. That ancient release of light is still traveling, even now. It is the oldest light there is, and a faint trace of it still washes over the earth and over you and over everything, a low, warm hum left over from the moment the universe first let its light go. You are bathed in it tonight, in this very room, the faint afterglow of the cosmos learning to release what it had been holding. There is something deeply restful in that, in the idea that even the universe, in its earliest age, had to learn how to let go, and that when it finally did, the result was not loss, but light. You can practice the same release now, here, in the dark. You have been holding the day. You can let it go. The doors can open. The light can stream. And nothing is lost in the letting. After the light streamed free, after that first great release, the universe entered a long, long age that the scientists, with their unintentional poetry, have named the Dark Ages of the cosmos. It is a name that sounds heavy, that sounds like sorrow or hardship, and yet I would like you to hear it tonight as something entirely restful, because that is what it truly was. The Dark Ages of the cosmos were not an age of suffering. They were an age of waiting. The first light had streamed out, and then, over the slow stretch of expansion, it had thinned and reddened and dimmed, fading from the bright fog of the beginning into a deepening dusk, until the whole universe settled into a darkness more complete than any night you have ever known. There were no stars. There was no sun, no moon, no scattered glittering points across a sky. There was only the hydrogen gas, the calm and abundant gas, spread out across the immense dark in vast, slow drifts, like fog lying low over a sleeping valley before the dawn. For millions upon millions of years, this was the entire universe, dark and quiet and full of patient gas, and not yet shining at all. Imagine that. Imagine a sky with no stars in it, not because they have been hidden by cloud, but because they have not yet been born. Imagine standing, if you could have stood, anywhere in that early cosmos, and looking up, and seeing nothing but the deep, even darkness in every direction. A darkness so total and so smooth that it would have felt less like absence and more like presence. The way a perfectly silent hall before a concert feels not empty, but full, brimming with everything that is about to be. The Dark Ages were the longest hush in the history of everything. The hall had been built. The gas, like the gathered orchestra, was settling slowly into its seats, drifting together under the faintest pull, gathering in the great dim spaces. And not one note had yet been played. The whole universe was holding its breath, and the breath was made of darkness, and the darkness was at peace. I want you to rest in that darkness with me for a moment, because there is a comfort in it that I think you can feel in your body. We are taught somewhere very early to fear the dark, to associate it with the unknown, with what might be hiding, with the absence of safety. But the dark of the early cosmos was none of those things. It was the safest dark there has ever been. Nothing could hide in it because there was nothing yet to hide. Nothing could threaten in it because there was nothing yet that could come to harm. It was a darkness with no edges and no dangers, a darkness that was simply the universe being, patiently, slowly, without urgency, without fear, a darkness that asked for nothing and threatened nothing and held everything that was yet to come. The room you are lying in tonight, with its own soft darkness pressing gently at the windows, is a distant grandchild of that ancient dark, and like that ancient dark, it holds you and means you no harm. You can let the dark be kind. You can let the dark be a held breath rather than a held danger. You can rest in it the way the whole young universe rested in it. for ages and ages, untroubled, unhurried, waiting only for the slow gathering of what would shine. And the gathering was happening, even then, even in the deepest dark, so slowly that nothing seemed to move at all. The hydrogen gas, spread so smoothly across the cosmos, was not in fact perfectly even. There were the faintest variations in it, the gentlest thickenings and thinnings, places where the gas lay a little denser and places where it lay a little thinner. Differences so small they were almost nothing, ripples too faint to see. And those tiny differences mattered, because wherever the gas was even slightly denser, it pulled just a little more strongly on the gas around it, drawing it slowly inward, gathering it slowly close. It is the same patient pull that holds you to your bed right now, the same low, steady call that the earth sends up through the mattress into the weight of your resting body, the pull we call gravity, working across the immense dark with infinite patience, never hurrying, never resting, gathering the gas of the universe toward the places where the first stars would one day form. Nothing flashed. Nothing burst. There was only the slow inward drift of gas toward gas across the great hushed dark, a gathering so tender and so unhurried that whole eras passed before anything came of it. And yet it was coming. In the darkness, in the silence, in the long-readied waiting, the first note of the universe was very slowly being prepared. The hall was dark, the breath was held, and the music was on its way. It is worth wondering, in a low and drowsy way, how we ever came to know any of this at all. How can anyone speak of an age before the first stars, of a darkness no eye ever saw, of a hush no ear was alive to hear? The answer is its own slow and tender story, a story of patient people across patient centuries, leaning into the dark and listening, and you can let it wash over you like a lullaby about the people who first sang this lullaby. For most of human history, no one imagined the universe had a beginning at all. The night sky seemed eternal, the stars seemed always to have been there, fixed and faithful overhead, and it was a comfort to believe that the heavens had simply always been, unchanging. The same hush over every sleeping generation. People lay down at night beneath those stars and did not ask what came before them, because it seemed there had never been a before. The sky was a settled thing, a finished thing, a great dark ceiling that had always hung above the world. Then, not very long ago, only a single human lifetime or two, the careful listeners began to notice something that changed the whole shape of the question. Watching the faint smudges of light that we now know are distant galaxies, vast islands of stars far beyond our own, the astronomers found that nearly all of them were drifting away from us, and not only away, but away faster the farther off they lay. The whole sky, gently examined, was spreading apart. And if everything is drifting apart now, then long ago everything must have been closer together, and longer ago still, closer yet, until, run all the way back, the entire cosmos draws in toward a single, warm, gathered beginning. It was a thought that arrived slowly and was resisted gently, because it asked people to imagine that the eternal sky had a birthday, that the settled ceiling had once been a held cord drawing itself out into a hall. But the listening continued, the way listening does, and the evidence accumulated like dusk accumulating into night, soft and undeniable. And then came the loveliest confirmation of all, and it came almost by accident, which is so often how the deepest truths arrive. Two listeners, working with a great horn-shaped antenna meant to catch faint signals from the sky, kept finding a low, even hum in their instrument, a faint static that would not go away no matter which direction they pointed or how carefully they cleaned and checked their equipment. It came from everywhere, evenly, from every part of the sky at once, a whisper with no source they could name. They did not know, at first, what they were hearing. But what they were hearing, it turned out, was the oldest light there is, that ancient release from the moment the fog lifted and the universe let its light go, now stretched and cooled across all the ages of expansion into a faint warm hum that bathes the whole sky and washes, even now, over every antenna and every rooftop and every sleeping body on Earth. They had stumbled, those two listeners, onto the afterglow of the beginning. They had heard, in their patient instrument, the hush of the hall before the first note, preserved across all of time, still faintly sounding. There is something so moving in that, in the idea that the universe's earliest breath is not gone, that it lingers, that careful and humble people leaning into the static one ordinary evening could catch the echo of the cosmos learning to let go. You do not need to hold any of these names or dates. You only need to feel the shape of it, that the dark you are resting in tonight has been listened to lovingly by people who wanted to understand, and that what they found there was not emptiness, but a faint and ancient and tender warmth, still arriving, still washing gently over you, the oldest hush in all of creation, kept safe across the whole long age of the world. And so, piece by quiet piece, the listeners built the picture we have wandered through tonight, not by being there, but by reading the faint traces the past leaves on the present, the way you might read the warmth still held in a chair to know that someone was lately sitting there, the way you might read the fading light in the western sky to know the sun has only just gone down. The universe leaves such traces everywhere, in the colors of distant light, in the abundance of the simplest gases, in that low even hum from every direction. And from those traces, patiently gathered, the whole slow story unfolds. The gathered warmth, the spreading, the cooling, the first calm atoms, the release of light, the long dark ages, and the slow gathering of gas toward the places where the first stars would form. It is a story written in faint marks across the dark, read by people leaning close and listening hard, and now told to you, here in this room, so that you may rest inside it and let it carry you, and need to remember none of it at all. Now let us return, drowsily, to the strangest part of the whole question, the very word before, and let us turn it over in the dark like a smooth stone in the palm of the hand. When we ask what existed before the first stars, we have walked back through the dark ages and the release of light and the cooling and the gathered warmth, and we have arrived at the beginning itself. And here the careful listeners say something that sounds puzzling at first, but becomes, the longer you rest with it, deeply soothing. They say that time itself, the very flow of before and after, may have begun with the universe, that asking what came before the beginning may be a little like asking what lies north of the North Pole. It is not that the answer is hidden or frightening or sad. It is that the question gently runs out of road, the way a path running up a hill simply reaches the summit and finds there is no farther up to go, only the wide calm view and the sky. There may be no before the beginning, not because something is missing, but because before is a word that needs time to mean anything, and at the very beginning there was not yet any time for it to point back through. I know that can sound dizzying if you grip it too tightly, so do not grip it at all. Let it be loose in your hand. Let it be one of those thoughts that you do not so much understand as simply lie down beside. Because there is a great rest hidden inside it, a rest you can feel in your chest if you let the breath go slow. If there was no before the beginning, then there is nothing missing back there. No empty void you need to imagine. No cold, endless waiting that the universe had to endure. No terrible loneliness in the dark before things began. The question dissolves, kindly, the way a worry dissolves when you finally see that it was made of a misunderstanding. There is no abyss behind the beginning. There is only the beginning, warm and gathered and whole, and behind it not a frightening nothing, but simply the place where the question rests and is at peace. The hall does not stretch back forever into a cold infinity of empty corridors. The hall begins where it begins. And the hush before the first note is not the front edge of an endless darkness. It is simply the start of the music, the warm threshold from which everything sounds, and even the word nothing, which we use so easily and which can sound so bleak, turns out to be far softer than we fear. When the listeners speak of the early universe, they almost never mean a true and total nothing, a flat blank absence. Even in the darkest, emptiest seeming stretches, the cosmos has never truly been empty. The space between things, the apparent void, hums faintly with a low restless energy, a kind of background shimmer that is always present, always faintly stirring, the way the air in a darkened hall is never truly still, but always carries the faint warmth of the room and the faint sound of breathing. There is no perfect emptiness anywhere in the universe, not now and, as best we can tell, not ever. The void is not a void. The dark is not vacant. Even the most desolate-sounding reaches of the early cosmos were threaded through with a faint and patient presence, a low hum of being, a quiet readiness, like a hall that seems empty in the dark, but is in fact full of the held breath of everyone who is about to arrive. You are never resting in a true nothing tonight. You are resting in a fullness that only looks like emptiness, a richness that wears the face of the dark, a great warm presence pretending, for your comfort, to be a simple, quiet room. So let go of the fear that there is some terrible blank behind everything, some cold abyss at the back of the world. There is no such thing. The universe does not rest on emptiness, it rests on a threshold, a beginning, a warm gathered chord, and behind that chord there is not a void, but a kind of grace, the simple grace of the question coming gently to rest. You can feel that same grace in your own body if you let yourself sink towards sleep. There is a threshold there too, a soft edge where waking ends, and behind it is not a frightening nothing but only rest, only the quiet hall of sleep full of everything you are, waiting to receive you. You do not need to know what lies beyond that edge any more than the universe needed before its beginning. You only need to let yourself drift toward it, trusting, the way the whole cosmos drifted out of its gathered warmth, unafraid, unhurried, into everything it would become. Let us pause now in the wandering, and instead of explaining anything, let us simply drift, because you have listened well, and you deserve a stretch of pure floating. Imagine, if you like, that you are being carried. Not carried anywhere in particular, not toward any destination you must reach, but simply carried, held, borne along through the great dark of the early universe, the way a leaf is borne along on the surface of a slow river, the way a single low note is borne along through the air of a darkened hall. You weigh nothing here. The drifting gas of the young cosmos is all around you, spread out thin and dim and serene, and you are drifting through it, or it is drifting around you. And there is no difference between the two, no up and no down, no need to swim or steer or hold yourself together. You are simply afloat in the readied dark. And the dark is carrying you, tenderly, the way the breath carries a held note before it is allowed to sound. Feel, if you can, how spacious it is. There is so much room here, so much unhurried space spread in every direction that nothing presses on you at all. The hydrogen gas drifts past in vast slow drifts, faint as fog, cool as the air just before dawn, and you move among it without effort, without weight, without any need to arrive. Somewhere far off, too far to feel, the gas is gathering in its great patient way, drawing slowly together toward the places where the first stars will someday warm to light. But here, where you are, there is only the drifting, only the floating, only the long, low hum of a universe at rest with itself, carrying you through its earliest age as easily as a slow current carries a leaf toward the sea. You do not need to do anything. You are being carried. Let yourself be carried. And as you drift, let the great dark of that early cosmos become the same dark that lies over you now, in your room, in your bed, because they are truly the same dark, the same patient holding presence, separated only by the long unspooling of time. The weight of you sinking into the mattress is the same low call that gathered the gas of the universe toward the first stars, the same tender pull, the same patient gravity, drawing you down now not toward burning, but toward rest, toward sleep, toward the soft floor of the night. You are being gathered too. You are being drawn slowly inward and downward by the same call that built the stars. And it does not hurry you, and it does not demand of you. It only holds you and draws you gently toward the place where you are meant to settle. Let it. Let the pull that made the stars lower you into your sleep. Let the same patience that gathered the gas of the cosmos gather your breathing into something slow and even and deep. Notice your breath now for just a moment, not to change it but to ride it, the way you might ride the slow swell of a calm sea. Each breath in is the universe spreading, expanding, growing more roomy and more at ease. Each breath out is the warmth thinning gracefully across the widening dark, a low note allowed to fade. In, and the hall fills with held air. Out, and the held air sighs slowly free. There is no effort in it. The breath breathes itself the way the universe expanded itself, without strain, without striving, simply unfolding, because that is what it is given to do. You can let your breathing be that easy. You can let it carry you the way the dark carries the drifting leaf, the way the readied hush carries the note that is about to be born. Drift, float, be carried. There is nothing here that needs you, and nothing here that wants from you, and nothing here that you must hold. There is only the spacious dark and the slow drift through it, and the same patient pull that built the first stars, lowering you gently and faithfully towards sleep. Now let us drift forward, ever so slowly, to the edge of the dark ages, to the very end of the long hush, to the moment the first note was at last about to sound. Remember that across all those millions upon millions of years, the gas had been gathering, drawn by the patient pull toward the places where it lay a little denser. And as it gathered, as more and more gas drew inward toward those quiet centers, something began to change at the very heart of the gathering. The gas, pulled together more and more closely, began to grow warm again. Not the harsh warmth of fire, not yet, but the slow rising warmth of things being drawn together, the way a crowd of people in a closing room grows warmer simply by their nearness, the way your own gathered body warms the bed beneath you as the night goes on. The more gas gathered, the warmer and denser the heart of it became. And the warmer and denser it became, the more strongly it pulled, and the more strongly it pulled, the more gas gathered. A slow tightening spiral, a deepening inward drift. The gathered chord of the universe at last drawing toward the pitch at which it would sound. And then, at the very center of that gathering, where the gas had grown denser and warmer than anything since the gathered beginning itself, a threshold was crossed, so quietly that no one was there to see it, and yet it changed everything that would ever come after. The heart of the gathered gas grew so warm, so pressed together, so concentrated, that it began, all on its own, to shine. The simplest atoms at the core, squeezed close and warmed beyond a certain point, began to join together into slightly heavier atoms, and in that joining they released a faint, then a growing, then a steady outpouring of light and warmth. A star had been born. The first star. The first true note sounded at last in the great dark hall after its endless, readied hush. After ages and ages of darkness, after the long, patient gathering of gas across the silent cosmos, a single point in all that darkness began, softly and then surely, to glow. And then another, elsewhere in the dark. And then another. The first stars, kindling one by one across the young universe, the first lights ever to shine in all of creation, the first notes rising into a hall that had waited, in perfect readiness since the very beginning. Imagine it, if you can, without any drama, only with wonder. The whole universe dark, dark as it had been for those endless ages, and then, somewhere in the deep, a single faint point of warmth beginning to shine, the very first light to travel freely across a starlit sky, the first glow ever to reach across the dark and land somewhere far away. It would have been a tender light, a clear and simple light, the light of the first generation of stars, made from the purest and simplest gas the universe had ever gathered. And it did not need to be seen to be beautiful. It shone into a cosmos with no eyes in it, no one to watch, no one to marvel, and still it shone, faithfully. The way the first note of a concert sounds, whether or not anyone is yet listening, the way a candle lit in an empty room still gives its full and steady light. The first stars asked for no audience. They simply shone, because the long gathering had at last brought them to the threshold of shining, and that too is a kind of comfort, that light comes when its time comes. That the hush ends not because anyone demands it, but because the gathering is finally complete, that the note sounds when the readiness is full, all on its own, in its own time, without being forced. And once the first stars shone, the universe was changed forever, gently and completely. The long dark ages were over. The hush had given way at last to the first note, and the first note would be followed by another, and another, until the whole great hall of the cosmos rang with the slow music of starlight. From those first stars, and the ones that gathered after them, would come, in time, everything else, the heavier substances forged in stellar hearts and scattered out into the dark, the gathering of those substances into new stars and into planets, the slow assembling of worlds, the long patient unfolding that would one day, across an unimaginable stretch of time, lead to a small blue planet, and to oceans, and to life, and to you, lying here in the dark, listening to the story of the light that made you. You are made, quite literally, of the gathered gas that became the stars, and of the substances those stars forged in their shining. The first note that sounded in the dark hall of the early universe is still sounding in you, in the warmth of your own resting body, in the very atoms that breathe and beat and rest tonight. You are a late and tender verse of the music that began when the first stars shone. And you can let that be enough to carry you the rest of the way down into sleep. That you are made of the ending of the hush. That you are a child of the first note. That the long dark waiting led, at last and inevitably, to the warm and breathing presence of you. Let us linger a while longer in the time before the stars, because there is more tenderness to be found there, and the longer we stay, the deeper you can sink. I want to tell you about how simple the early universe was, how few ingredients it held, because there is a great peace in simplicity, the peace of a room with little in it, the peace of a melody with only a few notes. Before the first stars, the cosmos was made almost entirely of just two of the very simplest substances there are: hydrogen, the lightest and most abundant of all, that calm gas formed when the first atoms settled into being, and a small portion of helium, the next simplest, formed in the gathered warmth of the very beginning when the cosmos was still dense and bright. That was nearly all of it. No iron, no gold, no carbon, no oxygen, none of the heavier and more elaborate substances that make up the rich and varied world you know. The early universe was almost unbearably plain, a cosmos of two ingredients, a hall furnished with only the barest few chairs, and yet from that plainness, everything else would eventually be made. There is something restful in knowing that the universe began so simply, with so little, with only the gentlest and lightest of substances drifting in the dark. We so often feel in our waking lives that we need so much, that things must be complicated to be worthwhile, that richness requires abundance. But the universe before the first stars teaches a softer lesson. It teaches that the grandest things grow from the simplest beginnings, that a cosmos full of galaxies and worlds and living minds began with nothing more than a faint gas drifting in a quiet dark, that you do not need a great clutter of things to hold the seeds of everything. The heavier substances, the carbon in your body, the oxygen in your breath, the iron in your blood, none of these existed yet. They would all be forged later in the hearts of the stars and scattered out into the dark when those stars released them. But in the time before the first stars, the universe held only its two simple gases and its long patient dark. And that was enough. That was always enough. From so little, so much. From a hush so plain, the whole symphony. Now let us widen out, slowly, and feel the scale of all of this, because the scale, which could frighten, is in truth one of the deepest comforts of all. The universe before the first stars was vast beyond any holding, stretches of dark gas so wide that light itself, the fastest thing there is, would travel for ages and ages, and still not cross them. The numbers involved, the spans of time, the reaches of space, are so enormous that the mind cannot truly grip them, and I want you to notice that you do not need to grip them. You are allowed to simply let them be large, the way you let the night sky be large without measuring it, the way you let the sea be large without counting its drops. There is a particular rest that comes from being small inside something vast, a rest you may have felt as a child held by someone much larger than yourself, the rest of being so completely enclosed by something greater that you can finally let go of the work of holding yourself up. The early universe is that vast, enclosing presence, and you are small inside it, gloriously, restfully small. And being small here is not being lost. It is being held. When you feel how immense the cosmos was, even in its quiet beginning, even before a single star had shone, you might fear that you are a speck too tiny to matter, a flicker too brief to count. but turn that feeling over in the dark and feel its other face. You are small, yes, and because you are small, nothing is asked of you. You do not have to hold the universe up. You do not have to keep the stars burning, or the gas gathering, or the dark from falling. All of that vast, slow machinery turns without you, has always turned without you, turned for ages and ages before you were born, and will turn for ages and ages after. Your smallness is your freedom. The weight of everything is not on your shoulders. It never was. It rests, instead, on the patient pull and the slow drift and the long, unhurried turning of a cosmos far larger than any worry you have ever carried. You can set your shoulders down. You can let the vastness hold you. You are a small, warm thing inside an enormous, tender dark, and the dark does not need you to be anything other than exactly what you are. Lying here, breathing slow, drifting towards sleep, a single faint note resting inside the great, readied hush of everything. Let us rest now with the matter of time itself, because the time before the first stars stretches across spans so long that simply contemplating them is its own kind of sleep aid. A slowing of the inner clock until the hours of your own night feel light and brief by comparison. The dark ages of the cosmos lasted not for years, not for thousands of years, not even for millions of years, but for a span so vast that the words begin to lose their grip. Hundreds of millions of years of darkness, of patient gathering, of gas drifting toward gas under the slow, steady call of gravity. Try drowsily to feel the size of that. A single one of your years already holds so much, so many days and nights, so many breaths, so many slow turnings of the seasons. And the dark ages held hundreds of millions of years, one after another, an unbroken procession of dark patient time, with nothing in any of them but the gathering gas and the deepening quiet and the slow approach of the first light. There is a great peace in that slowness, a peace that can reset the hurried rhythm of a tired mind. We live so often at a frantic pace, measuring our days in minutes, racing from one thing to the next, feeling that everything must happen now, that time is short, that we are always behind. But the universe before the first stars knew nothing of hurry. It took its time, all the time there was, hundreds of millions of unrushed years, to do the simplest thing, to gather a little gas, slowly toward the places where the first stars would form. It did not rush the gathering. It did not force the dark to end before its time. It let the slow pull do its slow work across the slow ages, patiently, faithfully, never hurrying and never resting, and the stars came exactly when they were ready, and not one moment before. You can borrow that patience tonight. You can let your own sense of hurry dissolve into the great unhurried time of the early cosmos. There is no rushing toward sleep, just as there was no rushing toward the stars. Sleep comes the way the first light came, in its own time, when the gathering is complete all on its own, without being forced. You have only to gather, and to wait, and to let the patient pull do its patient work. And consider, as you drift, how the long darkness was never wasted, never empty, never time merely passing. Every one of those hundreds of millions of dark years was doing something, even when nothing seemed to be happening, even when the whole cosmos looked still and dark and unchanged. The gas was gathering, the faint thickenings were deepening. The slow inward drift was carrying substance toward the centers where stars would kindle. Nothing visible was happening, and yet everything was being prepared. the hush before the first note is not idle time, it is the time in which the music becomes possible. The time in which the players settle and the breath is drawn and the readiness ripens toward sound. So too with the long dark of the early universe. It looked like nothing. It was, in truth, the patient making of everything. And so too, perhaps, with the quiet stretches of your own life, the slow nights, the still waiting times, the long dark passages when nothing seems to move. They are not wasted either. They are the gathering. They are the readiness. They are the hush in which the next note of your life is slowly, patiently, faithfully being prepared. Let that thought settle over you like a blanket. The dark is not empty. The waiting is not wasted. The slow time is not lost time. In the great hall of the early cosmos, the longest darkness gave way, in the end, to the first and most tender light. And it gave way not despite the long waiting, but because of it, because the waiting was the gathering, and the gathering was the making of the light. You can trust the dark you are resting in now in just the same way. It is gathering something. It is preparing something. It is doing the slow, patient work that only the dark can do, the work of rest, the work of repair, the work of readying you for the morning that will come, in its own time, all on its own, when the gathering is complete. You do not need to hurry it. You do not need to help it. You need only to lie here, in the long, kind dark, and let it do for you what the dark ages did for the cosmos, gather you, patiently, toward the light that waits at the far edge of the night. I would like to return now to that oldest light, the faint warm hum left over from the moment the cosmos let its light go, because it is in a way the closest we can ever come to touching the time before the first stars, and it is touching you right now, in this room, this very moment, as you rest. When the fog of the early universe lifted and the light streamed free, that light set out across the dark in every direction, and it has been traveling ever since, for the whole long age of the world, stretching and cooling as the universe spread, until today it arrives not as visible light at all, but as the faintest, lowest warmth. A hum too quiet for any ear, a glow too dim for any eye, washing evenly over everything from every direction at once. It is here, in your room. It passes through your walls, it passes through you. It has been traveling, untouched, since long before there were stars, since the universe was young and gathered and dark, and now, after all that time, it is arriving, gently here, where you lie. Think of what that means, slowly, as you breathe. The oldest light in all of creation, the afterglow of the cosmos's earliest age, is falling upon you tonight as faithfully as it falls upon the farthest galaxy. You are not separate from the time before the stars. You are bathed in its echo. The same ancient warmth that filled the young universe is filling your room, has always filled your room, has filled every room you have ever slept in. A low and constant and tender presence that asks nothing and offers only its faint ancient glow. You have been resting in the light of the beginning your whole life and never knew it. And it is a kind light, an even light, a light with no harshness in it, the most patient light there is, having traveled so far and so long only to arrive, at last, here, and to wash over you, and to hold you in the faint warmth of the oldest morning the universe ever knew. There is a closeness in that I find deeply consoling, and I hope you can feel it too as you sink. The time before the first stars can seem so impossibly distant, so far removed from your small warm life, separated from you by spans of time you cannot hold. And yet that ancient time reaches you, touches you, surrounds you in the form of this faint old light, this constant low hum from the beginning. You are not cut off from the early universe. You are wrapped in its lingering warmth. The hush before the first note still sounds, faintly, in every direction, and you are sitting inside it. You have always been sitting inside it, a small, late listener bathed in the oldest music there is. Let that closeness comfort you. The beginning is not far away. The beginning is here, in the faint warmth that fills the dark around you, holding you as it has held everything since before the first star shone. And when you understand that this oldest light comes evenly from every direction, that it is the same faint warmth no matter which way you turn, you may feel something settle in you that is hard to name. A kind of evenness. A kind of being surrounded on all sides by something kind. There is no direction you could face that would turn you away from that ancient glow. There is no corner of the dark where it does not reach. Wherever you turn your sleeping face tonight, the oldest light is there, the same, even, faithful, an enclosing warmth with no gaps and no edges, holding you from every side at once the way the early universe held everything it would ever become. You are surrounded, you are enclosed, you are bathed on every side in the faint and faithful warmth of the beginning. And there is nothing you must do to receive it. It comes whether you reach for it or not. It comes whether you are awake to it or not. It will go on coming, evenly, kindly, from every direction, all through the night, while you sleep, while you drift, while the patient dark does its patient work, holding you in the oldest and most constant warmth in all of creation. Let us go back once more, all the way back to the gathered beginning itself, the warm, dense, intimate origin from which everything spread, because there is one more comfort hidden there, perhaps the deepest of them all. In that first instant, when the whole cosmos was gathered close and warm, everything that exists was touching everything else. Every particle that would one day become a distant galaxy, and every particle that would one day become your own beating heart, were, in that beginning, pressed close together, neighbors, intimate, part of a single gathered whole. There was no far away, there was no separation, there was no distance between any one thing and any other, because everything was held together in that first warm closeness, all of it home, all of it touching, all of it one. Sit with that, drowsily as you breathe. The substances that make up your body were, at the very beginning, gathered side by side with the substances that make up the farthest things you could ever imagine. You were not separate from the rest of the universe then, and in the deepest sense, you are not separate now. The atoms in your hand and the atoms in a star, 1,000 lifetimes of light away, were once neighbors in the same gathered warmth, members of the same first chord. The expansion that spread the universe so wide, that placed such vast distances between things, did not break that original kinship. It only stretched it out across the dark. Everything that is far from you tonight was, once, as close to you as your own breath. The whole universe is, in this sense, your distant family, scattered now across the wide dark, but born, all of it, from the same warm gathered beginning, the same held chord, the same readied hush before the first note. There is no loneliness deep enough to survive that thought, if you let it in tenderly. You may sometimes feel, lying awake in the dark, that you are alone, separate, a single small self cut off from everything. But the time before the first stars tells a different story. It tells you that you are not separate, that you never were, that the very substance of you came from the same gathered origin as everything else there is, that you are woven at the root into the whole vast fabric of the cosmos, kin to the gas and the dark and the first light and the farthest stars. You are not a stranger in the universe. You are a native of it, born of its first warmth, made of its oldest substances, holding within your own resting body a thread that runs all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to the gathered chord, all the way back to the hush before the first note was ever played. You belong here. You have always belonged here. You were here, in the gathered warmth from the very start. And so the great dark you are resting in tonight is not a foreign dark, not a cold and indifferent void, but a dark you came from, a dark that is your origin and your home. When you let yourself sink toward sleep, you are not falling into something alien, you are settling back into the very thing you are made of, the patient dark, the gathered warmth, the oldest hush. You are returning each night to the place you began, the way a note returns to the silence it rose from, the way a wandering child returns at last to a familiar door. Sleep is a kind of homecoming, a settling back into the dark that made you, a returning to the gathered warmth from which you and everything else first spread. You can let yourself go home tonight. You can let the dark receive you the way the beginning held everything. Close, warm, intimate, whole, you belong to it, and it to you. And there is nothing in all the long story of the universe that could ever make you a stranger to the dark from which you came. Let us drift now to the very first stars themselves, those earliest lights, and let us wonder about them tenderly, because they were not quite like the stars you know, and the difference is a lovely thing to fall asleep upon. The stars that twinkle over your roof tonight were born from gas already enriched with the heavier substances forged by earlier generations of stars, and so they came into being already part of a long inheritance, already woven into a lineage of light. But the very first stars had no such inheritance. They were made from the purest, simplest gas there had ever been, the original hydrogen and helium and nothing else, the plain, unenriched substance of the early universe. They were the firstborn, the ones with no ancestors, the ones that kindled out of pure simplicity into the very first light the cosmos had ever known. There were no stars before them to teach them how to shine. They simply gathered and warmed and crossed the threshold and shone, the first of their kind in all of creation, lighting a universe that had never before held a single flame. Because they formed from such pure and simple gas, the first stars were likely very large, grand and bright and warm, great beacons kindling in the long dark. Each one a vast first note sounding into the readied hush. And they did something for the universe that nothing before them could do. They began to make the heavier substances, the richer ingredients, that everything else would one day be built from. In their warm hearts, under the slow patient press of their own gathering, the simple atoms joined and joined again into heavier ones, carbon and oxygen and all the rest, the very substances that would one day become planets and oceans and living things and you. And when those first great stars, having shone their fill, at last released their substance back into the dark, they scattered these new richer ingredients out across the cosmos, seeding the gas from which later stars and later worlds, and eventually life itself, would be made. The first stars were not only the first light, they were the first givers. They took the plain, simple substance of the early universe and, in their shining, transformed it into the rich and varied stuff of everything that followed. And then they gave it away, freely scattering it into the dark for all that would come after. There is a tenderness in that I would like you to carry down into sleep, the tenderness of the first givers. The stars you are made of, the substances in your breath and your blood and your bones, were forged in stars like those first ones and the generations that followed, and then given away, scattered into the dark, so that one day they could gather again into you. You are the gift of stars that shone and gave and let go long before you were born, stars you will never see, stars that asked nothing in return, stars that simply shone their fill and then released everything they had made into the patient dark for the sake of all that would come after. You are held up, tonight, by the generosity of the first lights, by their shining and their giving and their letting go. And there is nothing you owe for it. The gift was given freely. You have only to receive it, the way the dark received the scattered substance of those first stars, the way the gas received the seeds of everything to come. You can simply rest in the gift, simply be the warm late result of all that ancient generosity. Simply let yourself be the place where the gift of the first stars came, at last to rest and breathe and sleep. And when you understand that the first stars had to let go of everything they made in order for anything else to be, you may find a small permission in it for yourself. The first stars did not hold on. They did not clutch their riches close. They shone, and they gave, and they released, and in the releasing they made everything possible. You too are allowed to let go tonight, to release the day, to scatter the cares you have been clutching out into the patient dark, to loosen your grip on all the things you have been holding. Letting go is not loss. The first stars taught the universe that. Letting go is how the next thing becomes possible. So let go the way the first stars let go, freely, without fear, trusting that what you release into the dark will not be wasted but will gather, somewhere, somehow, into something new, while you rest, while you sleep, while the long, patient story of the light goes on without needing anything at all from you. Let us wander drowsily through the simple texture of that early world, the feel of it, the way it might have seemed to a sense that could have been there to sense it, because there is a deep restfulness in how even and smooth and unbroken it all was. The universe before the first stars was, above all, remarkably uniform. Everywhere you might have looked, it was very nearly the same faint gas, the same deepening dark, the same low even warmth, spread out with extraordinary smoothness across the whole vast expanse. There were no jagged edges, no bright spots, no sudden contrasts. There was no harsh glare anywhere, because there was no star to glare, and there was no biting cold of empty space as we might fear it, only that low even ancient warmth, the same in every direction, a smoothness so complete it would have felt like being wrapped in a single seamless cloth that has no hem and no seam and no end. Imagine resting in such evenness. So much of what tires us in waking life is contrast, the jolt from bright to dark, from loud to quiet, from rushing to stopping, the constant small shocks of a world full of edges. But the early universe held almost none of that. It was a place of profound sameness, profound smoothness, where nothing jutted out to startle and nothing sharpened to a point. It was, in the truest sense, even, the way the surface of a still pond is even, the way a long-held note is even, the way the breath of someone deeply asleep is even, rising and falling with no break and no surprise. You can let your own night become that even. You can let the contrasts of the day smooth out, the highs and lows level into one long, calm continuity. The jagged edges of your thoughts soften into the seamless smoothness of the early dark. There is nothing here to startle you. There is nothing here with an edge. There is only the even, seamless, unbroken smoothness of a universe spread quietly across itself, and you resting in it, smoothing out too. And the warmth of it, that faint, even warmth that filled the whole young cosmos, was not the warmth of any fire, but the warmth simply of being, the leftover warmth of the gathered beginning, spread thin and gracious across the widening dark. It was not hot. It was not cold. It was that perfect in-between temperature that asks nothing of you, the temperature of a room that is exactly comfortable, the temperature of being held against someone you trust, the temperature your own body finds when at last it settles fully into sleep. The early universe was, for a long stretch, exactly that warm, evenly, everywhere. A vast, mild warmth with no edge of heat and no edge of chill, a warmth you could rest in forever without ever needing to move toward it or away. Let your bed become that warmth tonight. Let the temperature of the dark around you settle into that perfect mildness, neither too warm nor too cool, the exact warmth of a universe at rest, holding you the way it held the gathering gas, evenly, mildly, without any edge at all. There is a word the careful listeners use for how smooth the early universe was, and the word, in its way, is itself soothing. They call it homogeneous, which only means the same throughout, the same in every part, the same wherever you look. But you do not need the word. You need only the feeling of it, the feeling of a world with no jagged places, a dark with no harsh corners, a warmth with no edges, all of it the same, all of it smooth, all of it even, stretching away in every direction in one long, seamless calm. That is the world that existed before the first stars. Not a frightening void, not a harsh emptiness, but a smooth and even and gently warm expanse, uniform as a held breath, seamless as the surface of sleep itself. And you can lie down into its sameness and its smoothness and its mild, even warmth, and let it hold you, and let it smooth you, and let the long, seamless evenness of the early dark carry you, without a single jagged edge, all the way down into the smooth and even country of your sleep. And yet, within all that smoothness, there were the faintest of variations, and I want to return to them now, because they are perhaps the most tender detail in the whole story, the smallest of things that became the largest of all. The early universe was nearly uniform, almost perfectly even, but not quite. Threaded through that great smoothness were ripples so faint they were almost nothing, places where the gas lay the merest fraction denser, places where it lay the merest fraction thinner, differences so slight they would have been impossible to feel. Impossible to see, the gentlest of unevennesses in an otherwise seamless calm. And those almost nothing ripples were the seeds of everything. For wherever the gas was even slightly denser, gravity pulled a little harder, and gathered a little more, and grew denser still, and so, over the long ages, those faint ripples deepened and gathered, and became the places where the first stars and the first galaxies would form. The whole rich structure of the universe, all the stars and galaxies and clusters spread across the sky tonight, grew from those faint early ripples, those almost imperceptible variations in the smooth early dark. Think of how tender that is, how the greatest things grew from the slightest beginnings. The galaxies were not there at the start, blazing and grand. They began as the faintest of thickenings in a nearly even gas, differences so small they were barely there at all, and they grew, slowly, patiently, gathering and deepening across the long dark ages, until at last they became the great islands of light that fill the cosmos. Nothing was forced, nothing was rushed. The faint ripples were simply allowed to gather, at their own pace under the patient pull, until they ripened into stars and galaxies in their own good time. And so even the grandest structures in all of creation began as something almost too small to notice. A whisper of unevenness in a smooth dark, a faint variation that gravity took up and carried, tenderly, across the ages, into everything. There is a comfort in this for the smallness of your own beginnings, for the small, faint stirrings in your own life that may not seem like much. The galaxies began as ripples too faint to see. Whatever small thing is gathering in you, whatever faint and barely there stirring of rest or healing or change, it does not need to be grand to matter. The patient pull will take it up. The slow gathering will carry it. Small things become large in their own time, in the dark, without being forced, the way the faint ripples of the early universe became the galaxies. You do not need to make anything large tonight. You do not need to force any stirring into a shape. You need only let the small, faint things be, and trust that the patient dark will gather what wants gathering, at its own pace, in its own time, the way it gathered the ripples into stars across the long ages of the early world. And there is something almost unbearably tender in knowing that those faint early ripples are written into the oldest light, into that low, even hum that washes over you tonight. When the careful listeners examine the oldest light very closely, they find in it the faint trace of those very ripples, the gentlest of patterns in the smooth ancient warmth, the seeds of all the structure that would later grow. So the warmth that fills your room tonight carries within it the faint fingerprints of the beginning of all things, the slight unevennesses that became the galaxies, the whisper of structure in the smooth early dark. You are bathed not only in the warmth of the beginning, but in the very pattern from which everything grew. The seeds of the stars are written into the light that holds you. And you can rest in that, knowing that the faintest things are never lost, that the smallest stirrings are written into the oldest light, that the patient dark remembers and gathers and carries even the slightest ripple, tenderly across all the ages into everything it is meant to become. Let us rest for a while with the expansion itself, that slow, gracious spreading of the universe, because it is happening still, and there is a deep ease in feeling yourself part of so unhurried emotion. The cosmos has never stopped expanding since the beginning. Slowly, smoothly, without any sound or strain, the whole universe has been spreading wider and wider across all the ages, every part of it drifting a little further from every other part, the great dark growing roomier with every passing moment, even now, even tonight, even as you lie here. It is not a violent motion, it is the most graceful motion there is. So smooth and so even that nothing within it feels pulled or torn. You do not feel the universe expanding around you, just as a swimmer carried on a wide, slow current does not feel the current, just as a sleeper carried through the night does not feel the hours turning. It simply happens, all around you, all the time, a vast, slow opening, a continual, gracious unfolding, the universe making more and more room gently, without ceasing. There is a kind of permission in that endless, gracious spreading, a permission to take up room, to spread out, to unclench. So much of waking life asks us to make ourselves smaller, to hold ourselves tight, to take up as little space as we can. But the universe does the opposite. The universe spreads. The universe opens. The universe makes more and more room for itself, endlessly, without apology, without strain. And you, tonight, are allowed to do the same. You are allowed to let your held body spread, to let your tight shoulders open, to let your clenched hands fall loose, to let yourself take up the whole of the space you are lying in, unclenching, spreading, easing open the way the universe eases open. Let your breath spread wider. Let your chest open the way the cosmos opens. There is room. There is so much room. The universe has been making room since the beginning, and it is still making room tonight. And there is more than enough of it for you to spread out into, to ease into, to open into, without holding any part of yourself tight. And remember that as the universe spread, it cooled. And that cooling, that slow, graceful release of heat across the widening dark, is one of the most peaceful processes there is. Heat does not vanish in a cooling universe. It spreads, it thins, it eases out across the growing space, the way warmth eases out of a room when the doors are opened, the way the heat of the day eases out of the earth into the cool of the night. The early universe cooled the way a fevered brow cools when a cool hand is laid upon it, the way a hot day cools toward a mild evening, the way a worked and tired body cools as it settles into rest. There was no violence in the cooling, only the slow, gracious easing of warmth across an ever wider dark, a settling, a calming, a coming to rest. And your own body, as it moves toward sleep, does something very similar. As you drift toward rest, your body cools, just slightly, just gently, the warmth easing outward, the temperature settling, the whole of you cooling toward the perfect mildness of sleep, the way the universe cooled toward the perfect mildness of its early dark. So let yourself cool, slowly, the way the cosmos cooled. Let the warmth of the day ease out of you, unhurried, spreading away into the dark of the room, leaving you at exactly the right temperature for rest. Let the spreading and the cooling happen together, the way they happened together in the early universe, your body opening and easing and settling, taking up its room, releasing its heat, coming gracefully to rest. You are part of the same long motion that has carried the cosmos from its gathered beginning to its spreading present, the same unhurried opening, the same gentle cooling, the same gracious settling toward rest. And it is still going on, all around you, all the time, and you are part of it, drifting on it, carried by it, spreading and cooling and easing, tonight, into sleep. Let us return once more, drowsily, to the heart of the question, to that lovely, unanswerable edge where before runs out of road, because there is a special rest reserved for questions that cannot be fully answered, and I would like you to taste it. When we ask what existed before the first stars, we can trace the story back a very long way, through the dark ages and the release of light and the cooling and the gathered warmth, and the careful listeners can tell us a great deal about each of those stretches. But at the very deepest edge, at the beginning of beginnings, the listeners grow honest and humble, and they say, simply, that there are things they do not yet know, that there may be limits to how far back the question can even be asked, that the deepest origin of everything may be a mystery that holds itself gently out of reach. And rather than letting that trouble you, I would like you to let it rest you, because there is a profound peace in a question that does not need you to answer it. You do not have to solve the mystery of the beginning tonight. No one has. No one needs to. The universe has gone on perfectly well for all its long ages without anyone knowing exactly what lies at the very root of it, and you may rest perfectly well tonight without knowing either. There is a kind of permission in an unanswerable question, the permission to stop reaching, to stop grasping, to let the question simply be a question. Beautiful and open and unresolved, the way a held note can be beautiful precisely because it has not yet resolved into the next one. You may lay down the need to know. You may let the deepest question stay open in the dark, like a door left ajar onto a room you do not need to enter, and you may rest in the doorway, in the threshold, in the open, not knowing, which is its own kind of peace. For there is a difference, a tender difference, between a question that troubles you and a question that holds you, and the question of what existed before the first stars can be either, depending on how tightly you grip it. Gripped hard, it can spin the mind, can pull it down into dizzying corridors of before and before and before. But held loosely, cradled rather than clutched, it becomes a kind of lullaby, a soft, open wondering with no sharp edge, a question you can rock yourself upon the way you might rock upon a slow swell at sea, never reaching the far shore, never needing to, simply rising and falling on the open water of the wondering. Let the question be that kind of question tonight. Let it be a lullaby and not a labor. Let it rock you on its open water, before and before and before, with no shore to reach and no answer to seize, only the slow rising and falling of the wondering itself, carrying you gently toward sleep. And notice, as you rock upon it, how the very oldest questions are the most restful of all, because they have been asked by so many before you, lying awake in so many darknesses, across so many ages. People have wondered what came before the stars for as long as there have been people to look up and wonder, and the wondering has outlived every one of them, passing from one sleepless watcher to the next, a question handed down through the generations like a low song hummed from one dark room to another. When you wonder it tonight, you are not alone in the wondering. You are joining a long, quiet company of people who have lain in the dark and asked the same open question, and found, in the asking, not an answer, but a companionship, a sense of being one of many small watchers beneath the same vast readied dark. You are in good company tonight, the company of everyone who has ever wondered, and you may let that company hold you, the way the dark holds you, the way the question holds you, gently and without demand, all the way down into rest. It is worth wondering, in a hushed and drowsy way, whether the early universe made any sound at all, and the answer is its own tender surprise that I would like to lay beside you. In the very early cosmos, when everything was still dense and pressed close together, before the first atoms had settled and the light had streamed free, the substance of the universe behaved a little like a fluid, a thick, warm sea of particles and light all pressed together. And in that thick, warm sea, faint pressure waves could travel, slow swells passing through the dense early cosmos the way swells pass through water, the way sound passes through air. The careful listeners have found the traces of those ancient swells written, again, into the oldest light, faint, regular patterns left by pressure waves that rolled through the early universe before the first stars. In a sense, the young cosmos hummed. It carried within itself the slowest, deepest, most patient of swells, a low, almost sound rolling through the dense early dark, far too deep and too slow for any ear, but real, a faint cosmic tone sounding through the readied hush. Imagine that, drowsily, that before there was a single star, before there was light to see by, the universe was already carrying within itself the faintest of swells. A low, patient rolling, a deep, almost music too slow and too deep to hear. It is as if the great hall, even in its deepest hush before the first note, was not perfectly silent after all, but held within it the faintest hum of the held breath, the lowest resonance of the waiting space itself, a tone beneath all tones, sounding only to those instruments patient enough to read it. The early universe was a hush, yes, but a living hush, a hush with the faintest swell rolling through it, a quiet so deep that it was very nearly its own kind of song. And that is, perhaps, the most fitting image of all for the time before the first stars, not a dead silence, not an empty void, but a living, readied hush with a low, slow swell moving patiently through it. The deepest and most patient music there has ever been, sounding in the dark long before there was anything to hear it. Let that low cosmic swell become the rhythm of your own breathing tonight. The early universe carried its slow, deep swells, rising and falling, rolling patiently through the dense dark, and your breath can carry the same slow swell now, rising and falling, rolling patiently through your resting body. In, a slow swell rising. Out, a slow swell easing back. There is a deep tone beneath your breathing, the low, patient rhythm of a body coming to rest, and you can let it roll through you the way the ancient swells rolled through the early cosmos. Slow, deep, patient, a music too quiet to hear but real, carrying you swell after swell, breath after breath, toward the far shore of sleep. You do not have to make the swell. You only have to let it roll, the way the universe let its swells roll through the dark. Without effort, without forcing, a slow, deep, patient rising and falling that has been going on, in one form or another, since before the first star shone. And when at last the first atoms settled and the light streamed free, those ancient swells were, in a sense, frozen into place, their pattern preserved in the spreading of the gas, written into the very arrangement of where the first galaxies would form. So the low, slow music of the early universe is not gone, it is woven into the structure of everything, into the spacing of the galaxies across the sky, into the faint patterns in the oldest light. A song that ended long ago and yet is still, in a way, sounding, still shaping the arrangement of the heavens, still rolling, faintly, through the structure of all that is. The hush before the first note was not silent. It hummed, and its humming is written into everything that followed, including, in some distant and tender way, into you, into the slow swell of your own breathing, into the low patient rhythm of your own body coming, swell by swell, breath by breath, to rest. Let us drift now into a long, slow view of where you sit in the whole great unfolding, because there is a deep comfort in feeling yourself a small, late chapter in a very long and patient story. Picture the whole history of the cosmos laid out as one immense, unhurried evening, beginning with the gathered warmth and the spreading and the cooling, moving through the long dark ages, arriving at last at the kindling of the first stars, and then continuing on and on through the slow building of galaxies and worlds, all the way to this present moment, to this room, to you. In that immense evening, the time before the first stars was the long, dim, patient opening, the hush before the music, the readied dark from which everything came. And you are very far along now, a small, warm presence near the tender end of a chapter that began in that ancient hush, a late and tender note in a piece of music that opened with the deepest silence. There is no loneliness in being late to such a story, there is only belonging. You did not have to be there at the beginning to be a true part of it. The note that sounds near the end of a long piece of music is no less part of the music than the first. It is held up by everything that came before it, carried on the whole long line of what has already sounded, given its meaning by the long patient opening that prepared the way. You, lying here tonight, are held up by the whole long story of the cosmos, by the gathered warmth and the spreading and the cooling and the long dark ages and the first stars, and all the generations of light that followed. You are not a stranger, arriving late to a gathering that has nothing to do with you. You are the latest note in a music that has been building toward you, in some sense, since the very first hush, a music that needed all its long patient opening in order to arrive, at last, at the warm and breathing presence of you. And so let yourself rest in the long view, in the deep time, in the immense unhurried evening of the cosmos, knowing that you are a small, late tender part of it, and that this is exactly as it should be. You do not have to have been there at the beginning. You do not have to last until the end. You have only to be here, now, this one warm note in the long music, sounding your small part in the great unfolding, and then easing, when your time comes, back into the silence from which all notes rise and to which all notes return. There is no hurry in such a story. There is no pressure in it. There is only the long patient unfolding, note after note, age after age, and your own small place within it, held and carried and belonging, tonight, here in the dark. Feel, as you rest in that long view, how it loosens the grip of the small worries of the day. The things that pressed on you today, the things you carried, the things that seemed so urgent, are real, but they are small notes in a very long music, and the music does not lean on any one of them. The cosmos took hundreds of millions of years to gather its first light, and did not hurry. Surely your own small worries can wait until morning, can loosen their hold, can ease into the long patient time of the dark. Set them down into the deep time. Let them be small notes that have already sounded and faded. The long music goes on. The patient dark gathers. And you, a small late warm note within it all, may rest now, fully, knowing that the great unfolding does not need you to hold anything tonight, that it has carried itself across all the ages without your help, and that it will carry you too, through the night and into the morning. A single warm note resting in the long, long music of everything. Let us linger, tenderly, on the very moment the dark ages gave way, on the arrival of that first light, because there is a sweetness in the dawning of things that can ease you the way a slow sunrise eases the end of a long night. When the first stars finally kindled across the early cosmos, the light did not arrive all at once, in a single, overwhelming flood. It came the way dawn comes, slowly, faintly, one soft glow, and then another, scattered across the great dark like the first pale light spreading at the edge of a morning sky. For a long while, the universe had been entirely dark, and then, here and there, the faintest points of warmth began to shine, and the dark, which had been total, began ever so slightly to lift. It was the first dawn there ever was, the original morning, the gentlest sunrise in all of history, light returning to a cosmos that had waited, in patient darkness for ages upon ages, for exactly this. There is something in a dawn that the body knows, that the body trusts, and you can let the early universe's first dawn speak to that deep trust tonight. Every night you have ever slept through has ended in a dawn. Every darkness you have ever lain in has given way, in its own time, to the returning light. And the very first dawn of all, the kindling of the first stars after the long dark ages, is the deepest proof there is that darkness does not last forever, that the patient dark always, in its own time, gives way to light. You do not have to make the dawn come. The early universe did not have to force its first light. The light came when the long gathering was complete, all on its own, faithfully, the way morning comes, whether or not anyone is awake to watch it. And the dawn that waits at the end of your own night will come the same way, faithfully, in its own time. Without your help, without your worry, while you rest in the patient dark that is its own kind of gathering toward the morning. So let the dark you are resting in tonight be a dark with a dawn already waiting at the far edge of it, the way the long dark ages held the first dawn already gathering within them. You do not have to watch for it. You do not have to hurry it. You have only to rest in the dark, the way the early universe rested in its long dark ages, trusting that the light is gathering, that the dawn is coming, that the morning is faithful and will arrive in its own good time. There is no darkness in all the story of the cosmos that did not give way at last to light. The deepest, longest, most patient dark of all, the dark ages before the first stars, gave way to the first and most tender dawn there ever was. And your own night, however dark, however long it may feel, holds the same faithful promise that the dark is not the end, that the dark is a gathering, that somewhere beyond the edge of your sleep a dawn is already, patiently, on its way. Let that promise settle over you and loosen any last worry that the dark might somehow last. It will not last. It never has. Not once, in all the long ages of the universe, has the dark failed to give way to the light in its own time. The first stars proved it, kindling at the end of the longest dark there ever was. And every morning since has proven it again, faithfully, without fail. So you may let go entirely now, you may sink fully into the dark, you may trust the night completely, knowing that it is doing its slow, patient work, gathering you toward a morning that is as certain as the first dawn, as faithful as the returning light, as sure as the slow kindling of the first stars at the far edge of the longest night the universe ever knew. Let us rest for a while with the darkness itself, and with a quiet truth about it that the early universe teaches more clearly than anything, that darkness is not the opposite of creation, but its very cradle. We so often imagine that creation must be bright, that the making of things must blaze and flash, that anything important must announce itself with light. But the universe made nearly everything it would ever become in the dark. The long, dark ages were the most fertile age there has ever been, not despite the darkness, but within it, the dark being the very condition in which the gas could gather, the ripples could deepen, the first stars could slowly assemble. The darkness was where the making happened. The darkness was the workshop of everything. The first stars were built in the dark, patiently, over ages, before they ever shone a single ray, and they could only have been built there, in the patient, unlit dark, where nothing disturbed the slow gathering, where the gas could draw together undisturbed and unhurried into the centers from which light would one day come. There is a deep reassurance in that for the darkness of your own rest, because it tells you that the dark is not a waste, not a void, not an absence, but a workshop, a cradle, the very place where the most important things are made. While you sleep, in the dark, your own body does its quiet making, its repairing, its restoring, the slow, patient work that can only happen in the dark of rest, the way the first stars could only be made in the dark of the early cosmos. The darkness you sink into tonight is not empty time, not lost time, not nothing. It is the fertile dark, the making dark, the dark in which you are quietly being restored, the way the universe was quietly being built across its long, dark ages. You can trust the dark to make something of this night, the way the early universe made the stars in its own deep darkness, patiently, faithfully, without needing any light at all. So do not fear the dark, and do not resent it, and do not wish it away. The dark is doing the deepest work there is. The dark is the cradle and the workshop, the place of gathering and the place of making, the patient unlit space in which everything important is slowly, quietly assembled. The first stars were a gift of the dark, made in the dark, born from the dark, and so, in their way, is the rest that is coming to you tonight, a gift of the patient dark, made in the quiet, born from the long unlit hours in which your body and mind are slowly, faithfully restored. Let the dark do its making. Let the dark be the cradle. Let the dark be the fertile, patient workshop of your rest, the way it was the fertile, patient workshop of the first stars. And let yourself drift, now once more, with no aim and no effort, simply floating in the fertile dark the way the gas of the early universe floated, gathering slowly, patiently, toward the centers of rest. You weigh nothing. You are being carried. The dark is all around you, kind and patient and full of slow making, and you are drifting in it, gathering toward sleep the way the gas gathered toward the stars, drawn by the same patient pull, eased by the same long quiet, held by the same fertile dark. There is nowhere you must go. There is nothing you must do. There is only the floating, only the gathering, only the slow patient drift through the fertile dark toward the deep rest that is being made for you, tonight, in the quiet. The way the first stars were made, long ago, in the patient unlit dark of the early universe. Let us gather drowsily all the way back to the gathered warmth one final time, and rest with the simplest comfort the whole question offers, that before the first stars, there was already everything. Not everything shaped, not everything sounded, not everything shining, but everything present. Every particle, every possibility, the whole future of the cosmos gathered into that first warm closeness, waiting. The stars were already there, in a sense, before they shone, present in the gas that would gather to make them. The galaxies were already there, in the faint ripples that would deepen into them. The worlds were already there, and the oceans, and the living things, and even, in some unimaginably distant way, you, present in the gathered substance of the beginning, already part of the readied hush, already woven into the warmth from which everything would come. Before the first stars, you were already there, in potential, in the gathered chord, in the held breath of the early universe, waiting to become. There is no more tender thought to carry into sleep than that one, that you were always coming, that the universe held the possibility of you from its very first gathered warmth, that the long dark ages and the first stars and all the generations of light were, in some quiet sense, the universe slowly gathering itself toward the moment it could hold a warm, small breathing presence like yours. Here, in the dark, wondering about its own beginning. You are not an accident dropped into an indifferent cosmos. You are something the universe was always reaching toward, present in its first warmth, woven into its readied hush, a possibility held close from the very start and unfolded, patiently, across all the long ages, into the living, breathing, resting reality of you tonight. The hall held your note from the beginning. The hush was always, in part, a hush before you. And so when you let yourself sink into sleep tonight, you may feel that you are not leaving the universe behind, but settling more deeply into it, returning to the gathered warmth you came from, easing back into the readied hush that held you before you were ever sounded. Sleep is not a separation from the great story. It is a deeper entering into it, a settling back into the patient dark that is your origin and your home, a returning to the gathered warmth in which you are always present, always held, always coming. You belong to the beginning, and the beginning belongs to you, and there is nothing in all the dark that is foreign to you, nothing in all the long story that is not, in some quiet way, your own. So rest now, fully, in the knowledge that everything you are made of was present at the very beginning, gathered close in the first warmth, held in the readied hush before the first note. You came from that warmth. You are made of that beginning. And when you settle into the dark tonight, you are settling back into the very thing you came from, the patient gathered dark that held everything, including you, from the very start. There is nothing to fear in returning home. There is nothing to fear in settling back into the warmth you came from. There is only rest there, deep and ancient and faithful, the rest of the gathered beginning, the rest of the readied hush, the rest that has been waiting for you, patiently, since before the first star ever shone. And let yourself stay here in this gathered warmth for as long as you like, breathing slow, sinking deep, held by the patient dark that made you, carried by the same slow pull that gathered the first stars, bathed in the faint old warmth of the beginning that still washes over you tonight. There is no hurry. There is nowhere to be. There is only the warmth and the dark and the readied hush, and you, resting in all of it, a small warm note settling back into the long, patient, faithful silence from which every note is born and to which every note in its own good time returns. Let us wander once more, slowly, through the whole shape of the answer, the way you might walk a familiar path one last time before bed, not to learn it, but to be soothed by its familiarity. What existed before the first stars? A gathered warmth, dense and intimate, holding everything close, a slow spreading, gracious and unhurried, making more and more room, a gentle cooling, easing the warmth out across the widening dark, the settling of the first calm atoms, the partners finding each other in the cooling, the release of light, the lifting of the fog, the held breath finally let go, the long, dark ages, the patient, unlit gathering, the deepest and most fertile darkness there has ever been, the faint ripples deepening, the gas drawing slowly together, the readied hush growing ripe with what was coming. And then, at last, the first dawn, the first stars, the first true notes sounding into the great waiting hall. That is the shape of it. That is what existed before the first stars, not a frightening void, not a cold abyss, but a warm, patient, gathering dark, full of everything, waiting tenderly to become. And you have walked that whole path tonight, from the gathered warmth to the first dawn, and you do not need to remember a single step of it. It has done its work simply by being a low and steady sound for you to drift on, a slow path for your tired mind to walk, until walking became drifting, and drifting became sinking, and sinking became the soft approach of sleep. The path was never the point. The drifting was the point. And if you have drifted, even a little, even just toward the edge of sleep, then the whole long wandering has done exactly what it was meant to do, and you may let it go now, the way the early universe let go of its light, the way the first stars let go of everything they made, freely, without holding, into the patient dark. So let the last of the wondering loosen and fall away. You do not need to hold the gathered warmth, or the spreading, or the cooling, or the dark ages, or the first dawn. You do not need to hold any of it. It will all be here again, faithfully. Whenever you wish to wander it, the cosmos is in no hurry, and the story is not going anywhere, and the patient dark will keep it safe for you, the way it has kept everything safe across all the long ages. For now, you may simply set it down, all of it, the whole long story, and let yourself sink the rest of the way into the warmth you came from, the dark that made you, the readied hush that has been waiting patiently to hold you since before the very first star. There is nothing left for you to do tonight. The universe gathered itself without you and will go on gathering itself without you. The stars kindled without your help and will go on shining without your help. The patient dark will do its patient work in the cosmos and in you, whether you watch it or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you are awake to it or not. You are free, entirely free, to let go, to sink, to drift, to rest, held by the same warmth that held the beginning, carried by the same patience that built the stars, bathed in the same faint old light that has washed over everything since the cosmos first learned to let its light go. You have only to rest. You have only to be a small warm note resting in the great readied hush. You have only to let the patient dark gather you, the way it gathered everything, gently and faithfully, toward the deep and faithful sleep that is waiting, even now, at the far edge of this long and tender night. Tonight has been about the time before the first stars, and about how that time was not a frightening emptiness, but a warm and patient gathering dark. Tonight has been about the gathered beginning, the spreading and the cooling, the settling of the first calm atoms, the release of the oldest light. Tonight has been about the long dark ages, the fertile patient darkness in which everything was slowly made. Tonight has been about the faint ripples that became the galaxies, the slow swells that hummed through the early dark, the first dawn and the kindling of the first stars at the far edge of the longest night. And tonight has been about you, woven into all of it, made of the gathered beginning, bathed in the oldest light, a small warm note resting in the great readied hush. You were always coming, you were always coming, you were always coming, present in the first warmth, woven into the readied hush, a possibility held close from the very start. You belong to the beginning. You belong to the beginning. You belong to the beginning, and the beginning belongs to you. And there is nothing in all the dark that is foreign to you. Let go now. Let go now. Let go now, the way the universe let go of its light, freely, without holding, into the patient dark. None of this needs anything from you tonight, not the gathered warmth, not the spreading, not the cooling, not the dark ages, not the first stars. None of it needs you to hold it, or remember it, or understand it, or stay awake for it. It has carried itself across all the long ages without your help, and it will go on carrying itself faithfully while you rest. There is nothing to keep, there is nothing to finish, there is nothing for you to do but sink and drift and let the patient dark gather you toward sleep. And when this is over, another quiet exploration is waiting on the screen, another slow wandering through the gentle dark, ready to begin all on its own. You do not need to reach for it. You do not need to choose it. You do not need to do anything at all. Let it begin on its own, a low and steady voice rising softly to carry you onward, the way the first note rose into the readied hush, while you stay exactly where you are, sunk deep into the warmth you came from, held by the patient dark. and if a question wishes to drift with you towards sleep, let it be this gentle one, asked of no one, needing no answer, if you could rest, just for a moment, inside the readied hush before the very first note was ever played, in that warm gathered dark from which everything came. What is the one small worry you would finally set down there and leave behind in the patient dark forever? You do not need to answer. You need only let the question drift, like a low note fading into the silence while you sink the last of the way down. Let your shoulders ease one last time, down and away, into whatever holds you. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands fall open. Let the breath you are holding slip slowly free. Feel the weight of you settling fully into the warmth you came from, the patient dark that made you, the readied hush that has been waiting to hold you since before the very first star. There is nowhere to be. There is nothing to finish. There is only the warmth and the dark and the slow patient gathering of you toward rest. The hall is hushed. The breath is held. And you are a small warm note settling at last into the long, patient, faithful silence from which every note is born. Rest now. Drift now. Let the patient dark carry you the rest of the way. Sleep well.